Now, often when you're building up a full app within any kind of framework, really, you're going to at some point want to link from different pages within your views to other pages. So for example, we could have a link from our home page over to our users page, and we could have a link from our users page over to our home page. Or we may have some kind of navigation, maybe in over here or in an include, which we may include into here. So either way, we need to figure out the best way to link between different pages. And obviously what we can do is create an anchor and give the URL, but I'm going to look with you at a much better way to do this. And this involves our Twig extension that we set up just over here. Oh, and by the way, I'm just going to delete this file over here. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so we saw that earlier we have this Twig extension. Let's look at an easy way to do this, and then we'll look at the best way. So I'm just going to put home in a paragraph, and down here I'm going to link off to the users page. So I'm just going to say users page, and then in here we would probably do something like /users, or more appropriately we would include the full URL. That's just best practice to include the full domain name and the path. So in this case it would be /users. So we know now that just by doing that, we can come over to home, we can click on there, and we're redirected off to the users page. As simple as that. Now there's only a couple of problems here, because if we changed maybe our domain, we would have to come and update our domain here. So let's say this was the CoCourse website. We would have to have cocourse.com in here. Let's say I changed the name of this. Well, I'd have to go ahead and update this everywhere. And really the main thing is, what if I change the name of my page? So let's say we change this over to users list. Well, in that case, we're going to have to come over and change it in all of our views. So when we update this here, we're going to have to come over and update it anywhere we've used it. A little bit of a problem. So the first thing that we're going to look at is our base path, and then we're going to look at our URL path generator. So coming over to index.php, let's open up this Twig extension again. Now notice here we're building up the base path to our application. So that will be something like the domain that we're working on, and then we're passing through to Twig extension, which we already had a little look at earlier, the router from our container. I mentioned earlier that we're pulling in our container here so we can access items from our container. Now we're adding view onto the container, but Slim's router, which we're essentially using here, is also on the container, so it can be easily used. And we're then also passing that base path in just here as well. So if we open up Twig extension, you can see here that in the constructor, we're accepting in the router and we're accepting in that base path as well. So we have then base URL and pathfor, which are alias to base_URL and path_for. And this is how we use these within our templates. So let's look at base URL. We're just going to output this to the page and literally see what we get. So let's come over to home. We'll go ahead and get rid of this, and we'll just literally in here say base URL like so. So let's go and view this, and you can see we get /slim. So obviously you can change this around if you wanted to add into here the actual domain beforehand. It's entirely up to you. Either way, we know that this is our base path. If I didn't have Slim here, it would just be a /, but we could use this if we wanted to go ahead and say something like base URL / and then the name of the page. Now it's a lot easier to use and a lot more common to use the pathfor extension that we have, or the function that we have defined out in here. So we're going to look at how we work with this now. Now, when I'm defining out all of my routes, what I would do is immediately after I've defined these here, I would chain on the set name method. Now, this allows us to give this a friendly name that we can reference anywhere. And even if we update this, the URL will be pulled based on the name. So let's go ahead and set a name for both of these. And in this case, we would say something like users.index. And I usually separate these by dots. Users.index would be a list of users. We would maybe have users.create if we were posting through to create a user. But in this case, I would do this. So now over in home, rather than actually linking directly to that URL, I would go ahead and define this out. So users list. And then in here, I would instead use path_for, and then I would define out users.index. Now this means that if I change this over, this URL here at a later date, I've not referenced it in here, so it will just be automatically updated for us. So if that doesn't make sense, let's take a look at this. Click through, we see it works. Now let's say later on down the line we change this to users/index or something like that. Well, it's just going to work in exactly the same way because we have not given the actual URL. Instead, what we're doing is referencing this by name. So that is just a little tip. Every time you're including a link, whether it's within a form, so maybe you had a form in here that allowed you to submit a contact form. In here, you would say path for contact or something like that, sorry, contact, and that would go ahead and submit through with that form action just in there. Well, like I said, they'll be taking a look at some more examples of this later on. But that is pretty much how we would do that. It makes it a lot more convenient. You're going to spend less time going through and updating all of your code now that you have names attached to each route, and you can use that pathfor Twig helper to go ahead and generate that path.